This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Brad Rotter. Brad has appeared on my show before, and I am always grateful for his reappearance. Brad is an investor. He's a venture capitalist. Very well known, at least in my circles, for being perhaps the first investor with Richard Dennis, one of the very first investors, if not the first, with many of the turtle traders back in the day. And as a venture capitalist, Brad has helped launch multiple new enterprises. Today, our conversation puts you into the mind of a venture capitalist. How does one think about a new opportunity? And the new opportunity that Brad and I talk about today is not so new, or at least you might not think it's so new. That opportunity, water. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Brad Rotter. Brad, it's good to have you back on again. We've covered a lot of territory in our prior calls and conversations. I would like for you to dig in a little bit because we're going to kind of go wide here today, but I would love for you to kind of lay out, as a guy who has been in the venture capital space for a long time, as a guy who is pretty well known as being one of the original investors in the alternative investment management space. I mean, for example, Richard Dennis, Tom Shanks, some very well-known names, and you had this foresight in the early 80s to make these bets, and you've continued to make bets, venture bets throughout your career. What's been your process? How do you explain venture capital from your perspective and how you've operated within your career?
I think that one occurrence kind of gave me perhaps a special perspective on things, and that was I grew up on a farm in Iowa. Not a lot to do on a farm in Iowa. I became interested in futures and futures prices, and was in charge of hedging our one corn contract on the farm in Iowa. That kind of led me to just sort of thinking as much as possible in the future whenever possible, and I just sort of developed the ability to see things a little bit more clearly, perhaps than the normal real world. Financial futures were just kind of a thought process at the time I was getting to Chicago, to the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the Chicago Board of Trade. I thought financial futures was a brilliant idea, and it just seemed intuitively obvious to me. Money was the largest commodity of all. Being able to price it and hedge it and write derivatives on it seemed like a big idea. And similarly and that led to the awareness of the concept, the awareness of the people that were just beginning to develop what I saw as a new investment class. That was hedge funds. I think I made my first hedge fund investment in 1982 while I was trading in bonds on the floor of the Chicago Board of Trade. It at the time was a very inefficient market. There was money laying on the pavement to be picked up, but it took dedication and professionals that were doing one thing very, very well. So I would look for those managers that had a special niche in a certain area and give them investment capital. I was recounting this a few weeks ago with one of my friends. Some of the first managers that I employed in hedge funds, I used to pay 6 and 30 as management fees and incentive fees.
Yeah, but they're making 100% a year for you.
There was money laying on the pavement waiting to be picked up. That's not the case now. It's a totally different world. I was going to night school at the University of Chicago, learning about the efficient market theory, spending the day on the Chicago Board of Trade, violating the efficient market theory. It was a pretty interesting dichotomy.
It's still alive, though. Nobody has killed the efficient market theory. They haven't killed it yet. Everything's still all this passive index fund stuff is all based on it.
The market becomes more efficient every single day.
Until it's not?
No, that'll continue. I mean, all of us are endeavoring to make the market more efficient at all times, and the collective result of that is the reason why hedge fund returns are more difficult to find these days. Edges are more difficult to find.
Let me give you a little pushback on that in the sense of the size of the funds. We've gone from funds that were several million, 10, 20 million in the early 80s to, I don't know where Bridgewater is today. You've got a massive concentration, and there's multiple $100 billion plus funds. That's a real change, isn't it?
It's a big change. I was actually Ray Dalio's first customer when he opened his shop.
Ray Dalio.
Yeah, but
you were the first for Dennis. You were the first for Dennis too.
Richard Dennis, yes. Ray Dalio used to sell his signals over a fax machine. So he would send out trade ideas, and if you liked what they had come up with, they would execute the trade for you and earn commissions. So it was literally over the fax machine when he began. Quite an individual.
But what do you think about that concentration today? I mean, given that your perspective is we're getting more and more efficient, it seems like when you have that assets comprising funds of that size, that just seems like brave new territory. Maybe it's going to be fine. Maybe it's part of the whole, as you see it, moving towards efficiency. But it is very new.
It is new, and it'll be a mixed bag. It's too soon to tell, I believe. I'm literally out of every single hedge fund except for one at the moment. And just because I think the set of available returns is at the moment not worth the fees being charged to gather them. That's how I look at it.
Let me shift you into venture capital. And when would you mark the time that you think where you've got this early farm experience, you've got the Chicago futures experience, you've invested with alternative asset managers. When was the shift where you said, okay, I'm now referring to myself as a venture capitalist?
I began making venture investments alongside of the ones I was doing in the hedge fund world. Back when I was in Chicago, I had a revelation that the futures market was going to change, and it was a fun dinner one night at Gene and Georgette's in Chicago, where I had the honor and the pleasure of having dinner with Leo Melamed, who was quite a character, and the chairman of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And at dinner, I blurted out a forecast that would later become pretty accurate. And I said to Leo, Leo, your Chicago Mercantile Exchange is going to someday be a large, rather irregularly shaped museum. And he looked at me and laughed and said, not in my lifetime, Sonny. But I had done the first electronic trade in the bond market when I was on Wall Street with a brand new firm called Cantor Fitzgerald. And it was an extraordinary experience. And because of that, I knew the power of electronic trading, and I knew how silly it was to have grown men yelling, kicking, screaming, shoving, and spitting on one another in the floor. It was great fun, but it was not efficient.
It changed really fast, didn't it?
It changed really fast, and so my forecast was partially right. Do you know what the grain room of the Chicago Board of Trade now is? A golf pitching range.
Is it really?
Yeah. You can go there and hit balls, but you can't trade there. It's pretty funny.
Amazing. Well, there's both the new ones for what would have been the Chicago Board of Trade and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. They basically built those new things, and then literally within years, they were, the electronic took over. Moving away from Chicago, you start to make these venture investments. And continue with your story with Leo in terms of what was that transitioning moment in terms of, was there one particular investment? Because look, you're a futures guy. You've got the exchange experience, and we're going to talk about something you're in the middle of right now that has to do with desalination, which is about as far away from futures as you could possibly get.
I look for long-term trends, and you wrote the book on that. If you can find long-term trends, you can make mistakes and be off in the timing and still do quite well. I'm looking for long-term trends. One of the most important trends that brought me to California was technology, the internet, cybersecurity. So I've spent the last 10 years as a self-described impact investor, and in my case, the impact that I wanted to make was on the security of the homeland. All of my speculations and venture capital investments have been in and around that theme. It's an important theme for me.
Let me shift you into what's near and dear to you right now today. And obviously it's a venture that you are currently assisting to raise money for. But I think what's so interesting and what intrigued me to want to have you on to this conversation, this call today, is not necessarily, look, I wish you the best and I hope everything makes a small fortune. But I think it's the subject area that first intrigued me. And because look, yes, you also want to make money on your venture, but if I read between the lines on the idea of providing fresh water for people across the world, your interest in this isn't just money. You seem to have a real personal interest in this as well.
Indeed. There's a lot of risks facing humanity at the moment. The list is probably longer than it's ever been, particularly if you fast forward the technological advances of weapons and those kinds of things. But the one crisis facing humanity that actually has a solution, in my opinion, is fresh water. It's an emergency at the moment. I don't use that word hardly at all, but the World Economic Forum last year every year they rank the risks that they think are the most pressing facing the planet, and the number one risk, according to their analysis, was fresh water.
Stop for a second on that really quick. I want you to kind of paint a picture, because if you're in America, it's pretty typical that you can turn on your tap, get water. In Europe, etc. Where I'm at right now in Southeast Asia, even if it's a developing country and we live in a nice place, it's bottled water because people don't trust it. And I think and you can put some numbers to this, but for the vast majority of the population, I'm going to assume fresh water is just something that doesn't exist. That's one issue. The secondary part starts to become is what happens when an emergency hits. And you're describing that as hitting right now.
The real emergency, and the way I'm looking at the water problem, is invisible, and that is there have been too many humans that have stuck too many straws into the planet's aquifers, the water underneath the topsoil. The water that's being taken out now in some of those aquifers was put there 1 million years ago. And that's why I think that this is an emergency, and it's invisible because it's happening under the ground. Here's the problem that we face when that occurs. As the water table is drawn down because of these wells and pipes and used for agriculture, the load bearing capability for the rock and the topsoil above the aquifer, it becomes weakened and it begins to crush in on itself. The Central Valley in California has literally lost 20 feet of elevation because the rock is settling in on itself. And the outshoot from that is that the water, the aquifer loses its ability to store water if it ever gets replenished because it's been destroyed.
Now you should add, so people have some context here. Central California, we're talking for global consumption, produce is off the charts. This is a temperate climate that just grows. You name it, it's grown there.
It's amazing what's grown there. It's an unbelievable fertile valley. It literally produces 90% of the United States supply of some fruits and vegetables, and the list has probably 40 names on it. It's a long-term issue. If
we look at this situation, even right now, there's been some crazy climate in the Sierras up there in Northern California. There's a lot more snow coming in. People are saying, hey, this can make a dent. The reality is, across the world, fresh water is a huge issue. Not only is it a huge issue, but it's an issue that has got some solutions. But those solutions, for example, number one solution, desalination. I mean, taking ocean water and making ocean water into drinking water. Sounds easy. I mean, everyone knows around the world there is fixed infrastructure on ground that's built. I don't know the cost myself, but look, it's infrastructure. It's going to be pricey. But how much of the world right now is getting their drinking water from the ocean? I mean, given that we have this critical shortage, given that aquifers are being drawn down, where are we in terms of consumption in using ocean water, desalination of ocean water in terms of our consumption? We're barely scratching the surface, correct?
It's 0.4% of the world's water consumption is now from desalinated water.
Basically nothing.
Basically nothing. It's just, but it is a solution. Human innovation has come to the rescue again. We don't really have a water problem. We've got a salt problem, and that's where human innovation kicks in. The project that we're working on, it consists of some technologists, some engineers, some environmental scientists, some shipbuilders, financiers, and a handful of admirals and generals. And our solution is to build a fleet of water ships outfitted with the current state-of-the-art green technology, power conversion technologies, and we believe that it makes more sense to desalinate at sea rather than on land. And there's a host of benefits, not the least of which are economic, that make that a very, very compelling thing to do. And so that's why we've attracted the team and the scientists. This is literally the only project that I'm familiar with or ever even heard of that actually has environmental support. Most projects around the world do not have environmental support. And there's a couple of basic reasons. First, the desalination now has become economic and large plants are being built. We just had one built in California, in Carlsbad, California. And it displaced, it's beautiful. Your most valuable land is typically on the sea. So they identified that land to build this $1 billion desalination plant, and it took 20 years to build it. Literally, it took 20 years from start to finish to get it approved and through the courts and through the environmental lawsuits and so forth. And they finally got it built. It took 20 years to do so. And it's now producing water for about 400,000 people in Southern California.
The fixed infrastructure must be for a desalination plant must be on the coast.
They've always been on the coast, but there are environmental drawbacks to doing that. Not only do you lose part of your coast if you build the plant there, but as those land-based desalination plants suck up the water to be desalinated. They're doing so from nearby the plant, and it invariably is also sucking up fish larvae, unlucky juvenile fish. That drives environmentalists crazy. When the salt then that's taken out of the water is deposited back into the sea, it invariably gets concentrated, forms plumes, and it can kill what's left over. By doing it at sea from these mobile platforms, the intake for the desalination plant process is from the deep ocean below the thermocline, where there's no critters. And when the salt is taken out of the water, it's put back into the deep ocean currents out at sea, and so it's like spitting in the ocean. You can't change the salinity of an ocean, but you can change the salinity of a bay or ocean waters nearby the shore. So it just makes logical sense to do this at sea from mobile platforms than it does from a big expensive land-based operation. Best case in point was Australia. Australia was going through a vicious drought that they were unprepared for. They panicked. They decided that they would build a desalination plant on a hurry-up basis, and did so. And they spent $6 billion building a land-based desalination plant. And just as they were about to commission the plant, it began to rain and rain and rain. And they ended up never turning on the plant that they had spent $6 billion for. So as we've talked over the years about new asset classes, I think we've stumbled on to a new asset class. I call it mobile infrastructure as a service.
That's exactly where I wanted to kind of add one quick tangent, which is that phrase, mobile infrastructure. And I was thinking today before we got on the call to let the audience into your world to imagine this. And it really opens up a can of worms, as people are going to see in a moment. This is actually potentially much more than just water desalination on large ships. But when you take that phrase mobile infrastructure, the easiest thing for all of us to think about are aircraft carriers. We've had mobile airports, in the military for a long time, and it's quite amazing that we actually haven't seen, quote, the mobile infrastructure play, where you can take one of these large carriers that are hauling cargo all around the world and outfit these to take on the functions that a city or a state might need, and have that diversity of use, to where, for example, your Australia story, instead of having built the $6 billion plant, if there was mobile infrastructure, there's probably another area of Australia that could have used the water. So they could have, if it was a mobile plant, they would have not made the fixed investment.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's infrastructure you can move when the conditions change. It could also be looked at as infrastructure investment without the pesky country risk, because things can and do change. And so the ability to manufacture manufacturing plants becomes very valuable, because there are economies of scale. We're building these ships in a very modular fashion so that we can harness those new technologies that are quickly approaching and are being attracted to this project. Case in point is carbon nanotubes will I believe be very important in the world of desalination. They'll probably increase the efficiency of taking the salt out of the water by an order of magnitude, in 6-7 years, for example. This mobile platform gives us the ability to deploy new technologies when they're ready that will increase the efficiency that we currently have with reverse osmosis in taking the salt out of the water.
Let's paint a picture. For example, let's say the ship is ready. And I mean, I have to think that just about anywhere in India, you can park off the coast and there's going to be literally hundreds of thousands of happy people immediately.
India is a very interesting market. They have not only do they have a water shortage, but the water that they do have is often poisoned. The way the ships work, the ships anchor semi-permanently off the horizon. We lay a very flexible subsea pipeline that transports the desalinated water to shore, and those pipes hook into, in most cases, the existing grid wherever the customer is, and we supply additional water to the sources that they have now into their existing system.
How far off the coast is a ship?
Typically 12, 13 kilometers. And the financing aspect is that those customers will usually be long-term customers. The ships will have very long-term water purchase agreements. By executing those contracts, those countries then can forego the infrastructure spend that it would cost them to establish a desalination plant. We bear that cost, finance the ships in the capital markets, and are just able to provide on-demand water.
You know, Brad, you've got a great quote in one of your presentations from JFK in 1961. I'm going to read it really quick. I think it really puts the audience into the frame of mind. 1961, this was not yesterday. Quote, "If we could ever competitively at a cheap rate get fresh water from salt water, that would be in the long-range interest of humanity and really dwarf any other scientific accomplishments," end quote. That's JFK, 1961. Speak to fresh water. I mean, I'm again, this is an investment that you're pursuing, but what intrigued me about it so much is because once you start to think about this idea, and especially if you've lived, for example, outside Western Europe, outside America, you immediately know how vital this is. And if a country is able to go ahead and fix their fresh water problem, it's almost like the most basic building block of the rest of society now getting up to speed with, for example, the economic development of an America.
It's fundamental. As an old commodity trader, it's fundamental. There's only one commodity that has no replacement. That there's only one commodity that you can definitively say will be in demand in all future time periods, and it's literally fundamental to life. That's why this is such an interesting commodity trade. As I look at this, what do you need for a commodity trade? Delivery. That's what we've developed here, is the way to deliver fresh water wherever needed on the planet near the shore. In many respects, this water play in the long run, I believe, could actually be a land play. There is lots of rich, fertile farmland near the seashore around the planet that does not have access to a reliable source of water, and these Watership Blue mobile infrastructure, it actually produces a supply of water that's more reliable than nature, and that becomes very interesting.
Explain to the audience. So we imagine a fleet of ships that have this desalination capability. How are they powered? I mean, and speak to what would have to be on board. I mean, we're obviously assuming very large ships, but the technology on board, what's the powering here?
Very good question. So these ships are kind of a marvel in itself. The primary source of power for the project in the beginning will be clean burning natural gas. But on this ship is a solar farm. We have some new specially designed wind turbines, specifically designed for maritime use. So there'll be a number of power sources, but the predominant one will be natural gas.
When I start to look at the various uses it really is a light bulb moment. The mobile infrastructure, the water issue, the water solution, the desalination solution is terribly interesting. But the idea of mobile infrastructure, wow, it kind of strikes you that we've got this world of supply chain and ships crisscrossing the world's oceans already, but no one has. I mean, as far as I know, is there a competition out there where people are looking at mobile infrastructure on this scale?
We've not run into that. I mean, it's a competitive marketplace, and I'm sure that other people will think about this and try to execute it. This is a big project, though. This is akin to, in some cases, digging the Panama Canal. This is a very large scale project. The ships are expensive. Each ship will cost about $300 million to retrofit and build and equip with the technology that we need to accomplish the mission.
But when you know there's clients out there that are willing to spend $6 billion for a land-based desalination piece of infrastructure, $300 million seems, it's not out of the ballpark by any stretch.
No, it's not at all. And the capital markets, we believe, are standing by to assist, if you will, with this new asset class. We believe that we were offered $250 million in project financing on literally my first meeting on Wall Street, which was kind of fun. We've come up with a financing mechanism that we think is as unique as the ships themselves, and that is, we believe that each individual ship can be financed in a series of mechanized project financings, where we will issue a series of blue bonds for each individual project. And so these blue bonds will in effect be water-backed bonds. I've not really seen water-backed bonds. There's a new phenomena that's just beginning in the States called green bonds, which did about $70 billion last year in green bond issuances. So we think that the market will be quite receptive to our blue bonds because they are, in effect, backed by water. They're backed by ships that make water. That's pretty close. And so we think that these securities will not be correlated to other securities, and they'll have their own liquidity, pardon the pun.
In terms of, let's say, a locality anywhere around the world that desires water, the process now gets turned on its head. So instead of that municipality having to float muni bonds or whatever they're doing to get their financing, some kind of, the folks voting on something, instead of going down that path, now it's literally just pay for what you need, essentially, right?
That's exactly right. And we've seen this shift to this, what I call this on-demand economy, where people renting out their cars and their bedrooms and so forth. This is that on a larger scale. There's a little bit of a lead time when ordering a water ship. It's as close to on demand as one can get, I think, in the world of water and infrastructure. But the real economies of scale come in when, as I said earlier, you're manufacturing plants. Those land-based desal plants have to be separately permitted, separately designed. The engineering that goes into that is millions and millions of dollars. One obvious benefit of Watership Blue is that we have non-reoccurring engineering. The driving force of Watership Blue is to harness those technologies and processes that will continuously lower the cost of manufactured water. If you can do that, you can save lives, you can, and perhaps open up new territory for agricultural purposes or for urban living purposes that heretofore has been inaccessible. That's the real interesting aspect of this.
This is how society advances. People go ahead and say, you know what? I see a problem. Hey, let's put some risk capital to it. Let's try and get this thing solved. So again, on the scale of, and I think anybody that hears about this immediately goes, oh, wow, that's a no-brainer. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Because we know already around the world, I mean, the numbers of people, it's in the millions, if not billions, that don't have access to clean water. So it's a literal no-brainer that I would imagine if there was ships in play today, the only issue would be, what are your profit margins? Because I would think people would be lining up to pay for clean water.
The UN thinks that there's going to be 4 billion people that are water stressed in 5 years from now. So it's a staggering number. Depending
on population growth, that's right about it, 50% of the world's population.
Exactly. Some economists think that the Middle East, the situation in the Middle East is so serious for their long-term potable water that it's going to start to knock off double digits off the GDP of the region. So that obviously is going to be is one of our prime targets for deploying water ships.
Brad, I wish you the best of luck. It's a terribly interesting project. When I was going through all the materials, I was just like, it's one of those things where sometimes when I'm having someone on the show, there's a ton of prep involved. I mean, look, there's a ton of prep involved here too. But this is the type of topic where if somebody sits down and reads 20 or 30 pages, you're just like, okay, I get this. It's like there's almost no. That's got to be a fun feeling when you're in the middle of a project. Look, who knows what the ultimate success rate is going to be? Who knows if you'll be the guy that gets it? There was plenty of search engines before Google, but I think you and I both know this is going to succeed in one way or another.
It will indeed. One of my friends said, "Hey, Roder, are there any comps to your Watership Blue deal?" I said, "Yeah, one." He goes, "Well, which one?" I smiled and said, "Oddly enough, the first one." He goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "The first venture capital deal that was ever done was a 3-ship deal that involved a queen named Isabella and an Italian guy named Chris." This is less risky, and it's really fun. We believe that Watership Blue impacts humanity at scale. And that's a rare opportunity in life to be involved in a project that does that.
If people want to check the project out, read more, maybe invest, Watership Blue, where can they go?
Watershipblue.com is the website. I always invite your listeners to link in with me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to reach me.
When you were on the floor at the Merc all those years ago, you weren't thinking you were going to be doing this today.
That is true.
But you just it's a matter of just one step, next step, success here, a little failure here, more success here, next step. It's that kind of a process, that entrepreneurial process that should be inspirational to people that want to perhaps, try something different than just being in the office cube.
One thing I found inspirational in my weekend reading, and this has not just generally been talked about in our press, but I saw a blurb in the Kiplinger report, and got some confirmation from the people I know in the Trump transition team. But the Kiplinger letter last weekend reported the Trump administration has proposed an 82% tax credit on domestic investment in U.S. infrastructure. 82% tax credit. I'm still young, but I have never seen a fiscal stimulus of that magnitude since I've been watching.
What do you think the infrastructure definition will include, or do you have a handle on that yet?
They've not completed that, but I'm hoping that definition of infrastructure will be wide ranging. It will certainly include water ships. I'm hoping that the definition also includes our networks, which I deem to be part of our critical infrastructure. But it'll be very interesting to see how that stimulus works. 82% tax credit is pretty enormous, and will help our watership project and many other similarly situated endeavors.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.